The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to GCV Analytics webinar. Today we are going to discuss a very exciting topic, a topic of impact venturing within the corporate VC realm. We're delighted to have two great guest speakers today, Charmian Love and Amanda Feldman. But before that, I'm gonna hand over to our founder and editor-in-chief, James Mawson, for a few brief introductory remarks. Jim?
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for that, Kaloyan, and delighted to be hearing the pearls and wisdoms from two of the real experts in terms of understanding not just the impact venturing space, but how corporations can play a greater role in making the world a better place. So we'll come to a more formal introduction of Shah and Amanda shortly, but just a quick thought about Mawson, the publisher behind Global Corporate Venturing. We do another title, Global University Venture. We've been exploring a third one, Global Impact Venturing, but we'll come to help that might be needed to get that off the ground at the end of the conversation. But outside of the publications, the websites, magazines that we do for GCV and Global University Venturing Gov, we also do the Academy, how to train the next generation of stars coming into the industry, as well as Kaloyan's role on GCV Analytics, helping understand what the deals and what the data means. How does it actually translate into action points for the future? And that's all part and parcel of the GCV Leadership Society. Effectively, the top 20% of corporate ventures do 80% of the deals. They're the people who are creating the ideas and best practices, the professionalism. They're really starting to turn what we think of the 3 Ps, the people, the professionalism, and the products and processes, and making it into a better place. So that's a little bit about us. In terms of what we also do within Global Corporate Venturing, as well as asking the 2 questions, who does corporate venturing and what do they do? We try and bring the people together so that they can share their war stories. Obviously, this webinar is one format to allow the ecosystem to come together and share best practices, but we do in-person events as well, such as the GCVI Summit, Global Corporate Venture and Innovation Summit we held 2 weeks ago in Monterey. That had 830 attendees, $10 trillion in aggregate annual revenue from the corporations who attended, and about 200 billion of venture assets under management. So it really was a who's who of the world's ecosystem, and that will be matched by the GCV Symposium in London on the 22nd and 23rd of May with the Powerless Dinner at the House of Commons. Part of Parliament have invited us in to bring these legendary folks together. And as outside of events we do in Brazil and Hong Kong for Asia and New York and other places, we pull together the in real life events through something called GCV Connect to allow the corporations to connect with each other and collaborate and syndicate deals. So just to quickly mention, our next event coming up will be in Israel in a few weeks' time, at Tel Aviv on the 5th of March, and the GCV Symposium in London will be 22nd and 23rd of May. Obviously, if you want to know more about the great work that Kaloyan and his team's been doing at GCV Analytics, thanks to Cubics Analytics for their support and helping make sure that we present and showcase the data in the right way for the industry, do go to gcvanalytics.com. Now, real stars of the show, promotion over. We've got Charmian Love and Amanda Feldman. Shah is a teacher at the Said Business School at University of Oxford. She's also chair of the B Lab UK and a trustee of the B Team UK. I won't say too much more about her background, but she spent many years at Boland's, which is really one of the sort of founders or really understanding how impact can change the world. And her close colleague from Boland's, Amanda Feldman, is also a specialist in innovation and investment strategy with funds, corporations, policymakers, and entrepreneurs. She facilitates the Impact Management Project. You'll hear more about that from her shortly, about quite how that's changing the world. And she's also a trustee at Future First Global and a mentor for Bethnal Green Ventures, among other roles. So, Shah, Amanda, thank you so much for being able to join us. Over to you. What's the insights in this ecosystem?
Well, I gotta say, Jim, we are here in London and with giant smiles on our faces. We are both Very happy and grateful for the lovely introduction. But we're also just so thrilled to be having the conversation tonight, this morning, this evening, whatever time it is, where all of you are, on a topic that's really near and dear to our hearts, and one that we have been working on for the last few years. Jim, I also just want to say a giant thank you to Global Corporate Venturing. You know, we have been a partner for the last few years on this wonderful adventure in corporate venturing for impact. So what we're going to try and do today is just kind of go through a few things. But before we do, can I just sort of share the reason why we have this somewhat kind of crazy creative photo to kick us off is this is kind of how Amanda and I feel a lot of the time, which is we feel super excited, super energized, and really hopeful, and with our eyes on the horizon. We think there's a lot of important work that needs to happen in this world today. We can't ignore the fact that there are some incredible challenges we're facing, whether it relates to the condition of our natural ecosystems and environments, to some of the real challenges around equality that we are seeing, and sort of the inequalities that are manifesting through various different levels of access to things like health and education. So we really respect the problems and the challenges that are out there, but we are also really motivated and energized by the potential for the solutions that are in front of us. So again, what we wanted to do to kick off this conversation tonight is just sort of share this as sort of a central image of what we kind of feel like at the moment, which is excited, energized, and we see there's mountains ahead, but we are excited to sort of scale them together with you. So what we're going to cover today over the course of this call, there we go. We've kind of already done a welcome. We're going to do a quick overview of what is corporate venturing for impact. It's always good to, you know, deliver what it says on the tin when we've got a webinar. We're going to share with you a couple of thoughts that we've been collecting over the years around, like, really why we feel the time is now to do this. So we'll share with you a few frameworks, a few trend lines that we're following quite closely. We're then going to spend a few minutes just looking at what are some of the models of corporate venturing for impact that we've sort of seen in the market. And then we're going to talk about some examples. We've got a few examples that relate to corporate venturing funds. But we also know that in addition to what the models are and the funds are doing, many of you on the line are likely interested in what are the actual deals that are out there and that exist. So we'll share with you a couple of examples of some interesting impact deals that we think might be of interest to those who are in the corporate venture space and interested in impact. So that's our sort of plan for the evening. Let's start with what is corporate venturing. So on the left-hand side of this slide, for those of you who are able to see it, what we did actually with Jim and the team at Global Corporate Venturing was we kind of took a step back a few years ago and we sort of said, well, let's just be really clear we know what we're talking about when we mention the term corporate venturing. So again, these two lines on the left are sort of what we use as our kind of platform, our North Star, when we're talking about corporate venturing. So we talk about venturing teams that engage with entrepreneurs as a way to bring new ideas and energy to their businesses. And we talk about corporate venturing activities that include running incubators and accelerators, investing through corporate venture capital funds, and obviously a whole range of different models that sit within those sort of overall sort of meta spaces for activity. Now, what you have on the other side of the screen is actually a piece of research we did last year with Jim, the team at Global Corporate Venturing, as well as in partnership with UNDP, the United Nations Development Program, as well as School Center for Social Entrepreneurship at Saïd Business School at Oxford University. And what we did was we were really interested in looking at what the opportunity could be to get more and more corporates engaged in venturing. And so what we had a team do was sort of go through using the tools of Capital IQ and look at how much cash equivalent, and short-term investments are sitting right now on corporate balance sheets. And we came up with a pretty awesome number, actually, which is $22 trillion. Now, that is only for businesses that are publicly traded, which have over $100 million in turnover. So we appreciate that that's probably a somewhat conservative number if we were looking at the entire private sector landscape. But we thought that that was a really interesting thing that, again, we use as we think about the opportunity for corporate venturing teams to do more and to have greater impact, because we can see that there is this potential resource that's sitting on the balance sheet that could be put to use. What is impact? I'm going to turn it over to Amanda, who is the real expert on this big question.
Hi, everyone. Amanda here. And as Char says, I've been spending a few years geeking out on what it is we mean when we talk about impact, not just because I think the world needs it, but because if we are going to manage investments and our businesses in a way that's doing a little less bad and a lot more good, then we need to know what we're working with, and we need to use the same rigor that we do in financial management. So over the past few years, there's been a real consortium effort, a public good effort called the Impact Management Project, to understand what people mean when they talk about impact, whether they're looking at it from an institutional investment perspective, charitable perspective, or policy focus, and think about what brings us all together, and therefore how we sort of talk about and measure and manage impact. So as Shar said, we have a lot of different models of corporate venturing that are emerging, and on the impact front, we're seeing a real acknowledgement that, first of all, that any business and investment may or does cause harm, and so we need to be acknowledging any negative impacts that are happening within our companies or portfolios, and wherever we can, seek to shift that and do less bad act to avoid any harm, maybe because of regulatory requirements or risk mitigation strategy, as well as wanting to just behave responsibly. And beyond that, go a little bit further and say we're looking not only to avoid harm, but benefit stakeholders where we can, maybe because companies think this has an effect on long-term financial performance, or because they believe businesses have a role to play in positive impact in society. And some companies and investors are going even further, and they're saying, actually, not only do we want to avoid harm and generally benefit all of our stakeholders, but we want to really contribute to solutions around nutrition, around education, around health, in geographies and in places where people don't have the access that they should, or for the environment, recognizing the huge challenges we face. So we'll dive in a little bit more to some of those trends we're seeing in the impact space, but just a very simple ABC to put into context what we're hearing in the market, which is impact is present in a lot of the activities our businesses and investments do, and we need to both acknowledge and better manage what's happening to do less bad and more good. So when we put those two terms together, corporate venturing for impact, there's a lot of different ways that we've seen over the past few years this manifesting. And Shara and I did some research a few years ago, along with Jim and a few other partners, to say, what are we seeing out there in terms of how corporates are engaging in impact? And grant funding is often what pops to mind for people and organizations, sort of through their foundations or employee giving. What can corporates give to impactful organizations around the world? And that's absolutely still a core part of how a company can engage on this topic. But there are other trends emerging. Financial investment, whether it's debt financing, providing first loss capital, creating bonds or outcomes-based contracts. We're seeing, and we'll go into this a little bit more later, lots of different models for financial investment, as well as a focus on innovation. So where R&D in a supply chain or venture development could support businesses' activities, and usually the wide reach that it has across many different geographies, as well as supporting entrepreneurs through incubators, accelerators that are scaling solutions to things inside of a corporate supply chain or network that they're not doing themselves. And so we're seeing both an internal push for innovation as well as an external scaling of opportunities where they're identified by the corporate.
Great. So with that sort of, I think, quite clear sort of description of both what impact is and sort of where and how corporates have in our research in the past, or where we've seen them engaging, I think we wanted to sort of just talk a little bit about why we see corporates really starting to mobilize with impact in mind. I know there's no way to sort of do a poll at the moment, but maybe in the Q&A it would be fun to sort of talk a little bit about the exposure that you on the line have had to the Sustainable Development Goals. These, otherwise known as the SDGs, are 17 global goals that have sort of been put and launched by the United Nations. They were in discourse and sort of debated and agreed upon by a wide range of stakeholders. So it wasn't just the UN working on these. It was heads of state. It was NGOs. It was people from the private sector community that kind of got together and they agreed that these are like 17 really important goals that we should collectively sign up to with the view that this is what we want to see the world look like in 2030. So they are time bound, and 2030 is the goal and the ambition by which we would see these 17 goals achieved. Now, I should say for each of these 17, there is a series of sub-goals that sit under them. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I think what you can see here are really important and aspirational things that I would imagine not very many people can argue with. Like we shouldn't have hunger. We should have no poverty. We should be having good health and well-being. We should be reducing inequalities. We should protect the life that we have below water and the life on land. We should be looking for ways to create decent work and economic growth. And we should be looking for ways to build responsible and sustainable production and consumption patterns. So the Sustainable Development Goals, if they aren't something that are currently on your radar, I wanted to take this opportunity to really encourage you to take a look at them. I think they're really important, and I think they are going to grow in importance. The best description I've had that I heard someone say about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are they're really the closest thing that the world has to a strategy. So I will leave that with you to think about. That's really one of the things we think is an important part of a corporate venturing a strategy, would be to take into account what these Sustainable Development Goals are. Oh, there we go. You know, beyond them just being really important things we all need to achieve, the thing that I think we also wanted to highlight is that there's work being done now to really quantify and do research to show that this actually isn't just something we should all do for the sake of future generations and to protect the planet that we're on, but actually there's a business opportunity here. There is a report that I would sort of encourage people who are interested in this subject to look into called the Better Business, Better World. It's from the Business and Sustainable Development Commission, has quite a few private sector leaders that have been involved in this report. So one of the headlines they had was they did see that there was that achieving these global goals, these SDGs, could create at least $12 trillion in opportunities. And as you can see here on this slide, you know, they've tracked specifically some key areas and mapped out what that level, that quantum of opportunity looks like, whether it's in mobility systems, healthcare solutions, energy efficiency, clean energy, affordable housing. Again, you can kind of go down the list, but I guess what I would really encourage people to take away here is that this is a massive business opportunity when we look forward to where the areas of innovation that are going to be important for both your businesses themselves and also the world around us.
And we're seeing this acknowledged by investors around the world, and I'm not sure how many people on the line are publicly traded or privately, but there's a lot of talk about divesting that we've heard about in the news, and where there's an interest in not having sort of toxic assets, as some call them, in their portfolio. But even beyond that, to my description of impact earlier, there are those that are saying that where they can allocate to companies that are actively trying to avoid harm or benefit stakeholders, we have investors who are focusing entirely on that and actually deploying more and more assets into those companies over time. The Global Impact Investing Network, which is where the statistic on the left comes from, does sort of a narrow scan of those who identify as impact investors, and they, through a survey last year from 226 respondents, clocked 228 billion USD alone, just that is already being deployed into impact investing assets, which to the ABC earlier is typically within the B and C categories. But PRI on the right goes a bit wider, and they're actually very supportive of any investor who's looking at ESG screens and governance, as well as social and environmental features of their entire portfolio. And for them, their estimate is up into the trillions in terms of their signatories alone. So we're starting to get more and more detail and data from the market, both quantitative as well as Shar described, this qualitative sense that it's entering the consciousness, both of investors and businesses, that there's something more that needs to be done, and thinking through the most efficient and effective ways to do that. The next slide will come shortly, but not just, as Shar said, it's a business opportunity, absolutely, but also not just for return reasons. For these investors and companies, we're also seeing that it's a long-term play. Between 1955 and 2015, only 61 of the companies listed on the Fortune 500 list maintained a position. So it's a real focus right now on innovate or die, as we say, and thinking through what it's going to take to sort of last 50 years into the future, and what does that mean for the company to future-proof and make sure that it's thinking about environmental inputs as well as social outputs and outcomes of what it does. We also have a talent question in play. 94% of millennials apparently want to use their skills to benefit a cause. So whether it's for talent attraction or retention, companies are increasingly thinking about what this means for their HR practices and making sure that they're bringing in some of the best talent out there. And lastly, on the right-hand side, you'll see that there is also continued research going on to figure out that whether this high sustainability in this study or whether impact considerations are affecting share prices and or values of companies over time. And we hope to see more and more research on that over the next 10 to 15 years and make sure that we're tracking where this is increasingly of value to the company, both on public and private markets.
You can tell we like using lots of pictures in our slide decks, and at this point, I think we've tried to share with you a couple of trends and some of the things that we have picked up over the years that relates to impact, as it relates to corporate venturing models, and some of these trends is like why you would do it. But I would just ask all of you on the phone tonight who are dialing in. I think thinking about this year 2030 is an important place to pause and just reflect, because I know some people sort of think, wow, 2030, that feels really far in the future. Like that seems like science fiction is going to be written about 2030. But it isn't actually that far. And so I just ask you to do just a short little back of the envelope piece of arithmetic for those of you who have young people in your life, whether it's kids, grandkids, nieces, nephews, brothers and sisters. Just ask you to figure out how old are those young people that are in your life right now going to be in 2030. Just take a second and think about that. Because actually, when you start thinking about it, 2030 actually doesn't seem that far away after all. And I want to just move to the next slide, if we may, because I think, again, we have a lot of really important work that needs to happen between now and 2030. It's a really, really important period of time. I feel like we could do a whole webinar on some of the climate change related data that is coming out, and these are facts, and these are really important things for us to be internalizing and thinking about. Again, I think there could be a whole webinar on the findings of the IPCC report that came out in October of last year, and there's a lot more reports that are coming out. This is one slide that I use quite a bit in my work at Oxford, because I think it really tells the story without having a whole lot of detail on it. It's the trajectory of the lines that I would just ask you to look at. The trajectory of the lines that show like what are we on track for right now, what is the baseline, what is our current policy trajectory, but what is the inflection, what is the level of change we should be making today in order to reset what these lines look like. I think it's hard to argue that we would want to have a world that has more than a 2-degree Celsius increase. And again, that's a whole separate GCV webinar we could do. But actually what we really want is to get on a 1.5 degrees Celsius trajectory. But I just would encourage you to look at the amount of change, the delta that we need to do collectively to retool, rethink, rebuild what our system looks like. And that the time we have to do that is now. Good news though, folks. Good news. Change is happening. And it is coming, and it is something that we are seeing so many signs of hope for. For again, that I wish I could put 2 pictures on the slide, but I really wanted you guys to know that I really am hopeful. I see that there's change, and that's why Amanda and I are sort of that metaphorical jumping, leaping in the air with excitement at the mountains that are ahead of us. I think we sense that again this change is happening, and what we have the opportunity to do as an entire field of practice is be a really important part of perhaps one of the greatest stories that will never be told, which is how we change those trajectory lines and get ourselves on a trajectory where our collective action leads to the kind of temperature increase that will be hopeful for generations to come. And I want to sort of show this image, and I realize it's probably got a lot of small writing on it. It actually is pulled from an infographic that we did last year, again with GCV, the UNDP, and Saïd Business School. What we tried to get across in this infographic is that actually, we really need to approach both the problems and the opportunities that we're seeing as a system. They're interconnected, both the challenges that exist, the sustainable development goals that we talked about earlier, and also some of the innovation and some of the exciting stuff that's happening. These are not things that operate in silos. They actually are interconnected and interdependent with one another. For example, what we see and we're so excited by is that there is already a lot of deal flow happening by corporates in areas that align with the sustainable development goals. You could see just a few of these numbers here. There was 102 deals done last year worth $3 billion in areas which we roughly tagged as being around industry, innovation, and infrastructure. We saw 54 deals from that'll connect to affordable and clean energy, worth $1.3 billion. We saw a lot of work happening around good health and well-being, food and agriculture, which connects into zero hunger. Lots of work happening around water and sanitation. So we're again hopeful because what we are seeing is that action is happening. And many of you guys on the line who are working with corporates and within these corporate venturing teams are a big part of, again, the success story that we see as being really important to get us onto the trajectory we want to be on.
And as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of different ways that you guys are taking action, which is exciting. And actually, this is just a short list of the 11 different corporate venturing models across innovation. So whether it's researching and designing new ideas or incubating viable projects or investing and scaling proven concepts and making sure that they have the capital they need and the resources to scale in the face of these challenges. These 11 different models have been identified out there, but we'd be interested, and we have some questions at the end of the call, how you guys are approaching this in your companies and whether there's something missing here or other innovative, creative ways that you guys are thinking about venturing for impact within your companies and with partners. We're talking a lot on this GCV webinar about the role of corporates because there is a huge role and the trillions on balance sheets are a helpful start, but we're also seeing public sector actors, charitable efforts, all having to work together to in the face of these challenges. So not only just what are corporates doing, but what are corporates doing in partnership towards impact.
Great, thanks, Amanda. So we're kind of getting towards the end of our presentation because we wanted to make sure there was a lot of time for Q&A. But before we sort of open it up to you, I think what we wanted to do is just sort of, showcase a couple of things that we've been following and that we're really excited about, where this action is happening. So on the slide, you'll just see 3 examples of some really interesting companies who are taking some action. I'm not sure if I see anyone from any of these 3 companies on the line tonight, but if there is, please, I'd hope that you would chime in and tell us what you think. But Danone, I'm only going to speak very briefly, and I would say is if anyone's interested in more details about each of these examples, we'd be happy to pick this up as a phone call or share with you some of the reports that we've done where there are more sort of full, flushed out case studies. But for the example of Danone Manifesto Ventures, which was started in 2016, this really is a corporate venturing strategy that's looking at both sort of providing financial capital, but also operational support to the businesses it's investing in, which I know is a very common strategy, and many of you are probably aware of that. And it looks like they do a lot of venture and growth and fund-to-fund work. But I think what's really exciting about what Danone Manifesto Ventures is doing is, they're looking at ways in which they can future-proof their business. So the areas that they're focused on include, alternative proteins and organic products. They're looking at a whole range of really interesting, areas, and I think the idea is that the innovations and the ventures that Danone Manifesto Ventures is supporting ultimately will become the next Danone success stories. I should also do a personal sort of little shout out, and for full disclosure, that I'm a huge fan of Danone Manifesto Ventures because they have actually themselves certified as a B Corp, which is a for-profit business that has been certified to operate for the benefit of both shareholders and stakeholders. And again, I'm happy to share more on what B Corps are to anyone who's interested. So that's Danone Manifesto Ventures. We also, beside them, have Tin Shed Ventures, which is another great example. This is Patagonia's corporate venturing initiative, which was started in 2013. And actually, when it was started, the original name of it was $20 million and change. But they changed the name because I think it was they did a lot more than 20 million. They're sort of focused on seed and Series A, and some of the deals that they've been looking at and are engaged in involve things like sustainable materials. They're really interested in conservation of natural resources and sort of the technology that can be used in the supply chain for apparel industry, clothing and equipment. I was really excited to see one of, I think, the organizations they've been involved in is Boreal, which has a really interesting way of using fish nets and converting them into skateboard decks. So again, you can see there's some really fun stories, I think, in some of the entrepreneurial ventures that organizations like Tin Shed Ventures engage with. Last but not least, I think Centrica here in the UK is a good example. And in fact, actually, this is one where we have written a full case study from sort of inception through to launch of what happened when Centrica, which is an energy company, came together and said, we really want to do something. They created Ignite as initially a £10 million fund that was focusing on social enterprises that were working in the energy space. So again, it sort of was started in 2014. Ignite is the name of the fund. In 2017, it actually became part of a bigger strategy called Centrica Innovation, where it's broken into two groups. There's sort of Centrica Ventures, which is now, from what I understand, £100 million of resource, and then Centrica Labs, which is where the portfolio for Ignite sits, as well as having interest in doing seed investment and sort of running an accelerator, which supports businesses that are both external as well as internal. So ideas that people within Ignite come up with are sort of supported through Centrica Labs. One of the interesting deals that Ignite did was with a company called BioBean, which is really cool. It sort of takes coffee waste or coffee rinds and actually converts it into a usable biofuel. So you can see in each of these examples, these are the core business being sort of focused in particular areas, but a real sort of appetite to look at where their industry and where their business could go next by really taking on board what the impact is of the businesses that they're supporting and investing in. Great, and then just an example of a couple of more deals. Again, this was from the infographic we did last year, where what we tried to do is identify, with the help of our friends at Global Corporate Venturing, some of the deals that had been done recently that we thought were interesting because they had a sector that aligned in some way, we thought, to sustainable development goals. They had a corporate investor, or in some cases, investors. They had pretty serious round sizes. I think that's always a sort of a relative term in some ways. But they were also interesting to us because what we did was we worked with an organization called Venturing for Good, and actually took the deals through a process of understanding which of the SDGs did they align to and with what level of proximity and confidence. So you can see from these three examples, again, Lemonade is a fairly, I think, a well-known deal that was done. Lemonade is a home insurance company, which uses behavioral economics, which had investors from SoftBank and Google Ventures. And I think what was interesting here was for us that they were when they were put through the filter, it was very clear that they had sort of an SDG alignment. So again, that's the Lemonade example, and you can see the other two that we took through a similar process. And I think with the other two, you can also see that it's not just one SDG, but there's actually an opportunity to touch multiple SDGs through it. I need to double check with Lemonade who those investors are, but I think SoftBank was certainly one of them. And yeah, so maybe we can spend a little bit more time talking about other examples. I'd love to hear from you guys, the deals that you're seeing that you think have an alignment to sustainable development goals as a way of thinking about impact. But before we get into our formal questions, I just want to leave you with a few examples of some resources that we thought you might be interested in if this is a topic of consideration for you and you're interested in what the journey has been for corporates that have been interested in exploring impact. What you'll see here are 4 examples of reports that we've worked on over the years. I should say that if you can spot one thing that they all have in common is that they all have global corporate venturing in common as a partner. So again, we are just so pleased to have been able to work with Jim and Kaloyan and the rest of the team on developing these materials. They're all available on the internet, so we are happy to circulate them. And I think what we're excited about is what the next chapter in the corporate venturing for impact journey looks like. And it's certainly a chapter that we are super excited to develop with all of you.
So we have a few questions just to guide discussion, but we're really happy also to just answer anything you have in mind or hear examples of where you see this in action. But our questions to get us started are: what would help you engage more in impact for your corporate venturing strategy? What information do you need to access, or information do you wish was out there? And also just a question on partnerships. What partners have you worked with? Have you engaged with development partners, or like donors or foundations in the past? And any lessons learned on that journey? So with that, I think Kaloyan can unmute you all, or allow attendees to speak, and we can take it from there and answer any questions and hear your insights as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Shah. Thank you, Amanda. That was a real tour de force of, information and insights on the impact venturing space. So really much appreciated. We've got a first question coming in for those on the webinar. Do use the question box on the right-hand side as you come in on the control panel. You'll be able to write questions there. We've got one from Moses Choi over at Orange. And he's saying, great webinar. Can you shed some light on the benefits of a CVC, or corporate venture, getting a B Corp certification? That's one for you, Michelle.
I know. I feel like, thanks for the great question. Again, I'm going to I'm going to try and answer this without my B Corp hat on, but it's a hard one for me to answer without it on. So maybe just a quick moment just on what B Corp certification is, just a little bit more than what maybe I mentioned going through the slides pretty quickly. B Corps are, again, for-profit businesses, and the way that you become a B Corp is you sort of have to go through two steps. One is you have to meet a minimum threshold of what we call our performance standard, and that's an online assessment that you go through that subsequently has verification and diligence steps associated with it. What that certification, or what that performance test does is it asks you a series of questions about your governance as an organization, how you treat your workers, how you are mindful and respectful and engaging with your wider community, and what your environmental footprint looks like. So those are sort of the operations of your business and how you meet what is we consider the best of class, the highest standard across those four operational areas. The other side of the performance assessment also considers what your business model is. We call it the impact business model. So what is it that your business is doing that is actually creating positive externalities? It's creating positive impact in the world. And if you get in the process of going through the questions that, again, cover your operations, what you do, how you do what you do, and your strategy, what your impact business model is, that is your sort of first step, and you have it verified. The second thing that makes the B Corp certification, I think, really special is what you're also required to do is go through what we call the legal test, and that is where you actually change the articles of your organization so that it clearly reflects that you as a business equally are considering your shareholders and stakeholders, and that would manifest through, for example, how your directors' duties are created, so that or how they're communicated, so that it's absolutely clear that your directors have to equally consider, again, in the decision-making process, both shareholders and stakeholders. So I realize I'm sort of doing a longer answer to this question, but I think to answer it properly, it's probably helpful just for everybody to have that in mind of what a B Corp is. And it's a very sort of, it's not an easy standard to reach, and it's not designed to be easy. It's designed to truly celebrate best-in-class businesses who are also signed up to the principles of continuous improvement. So you have to recertify every couple of years. So anyways, getting back to the question, the benefit of a corporate venture capital fund becoming a B Corp, I think there are many sort of there are many advantages. I think one of them is you're sending a signal as an investor to what the things are that are important to you as an investor by how you yourself operate. And I certainly think that some of the most interesting, the best deals that are out there are being led by entrepreneurs who are going to look and think very carefully about who they want to take investment from and from who they want as their supporters. So if you as a CVC are able to show that you really are meaningfully thinking about the impact, I think that's an important signal that you'll be sending out to the deals and the entrepreneurs that you want to attract yourself. There's a whole lot of other reasons why investors are becoming certified. They include attracting really great talent, as Amanda talked about, as one of the things that we know a lot of people are considering. And also, it's a really good way to run your business. So I think for any business that really wants to be taking a leadership position in this space, the BCorp certification is a way to really sort of, signal it, but also almost go through the road mapping exercise to understand what is it you would need to do to really be best in class. Anyways, I realized I could talk all night about BCorp, and there's probably sort of other topics that we want to discuss, but hopefully that answers your question a little bit about, what is a BCorp in a little bit more detail and some of the benefits of BCorp certification.
And just one more thing from me, having come from a fund manager where I've been working for the past few years that manages about $1 billion. I just want to add to Char's comments that the BIA is free and accessible online. And one of the reasons that as a fund manager we decided to certify was just going through the questions, raised some really interesting insights about what we were and weren't doing for the community, for employees, and for the funds and entrepreneurs that we were working with. And so, if anything, have an exploration. You can decide whether you want to certify later, but just as a starter, to see the questions that are in there and understanding those global benchmarks, it has been a really interesting process, at least in my experience working in B Corps.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. I would also just add to that actually there are funds that have not necessarily certified as B corporations, but do use the tool as part of their diligence or pre-diligence, a process. So if you have in mind to be a B Corp, I think there's a lot of investment funds and firms like the one Amanda has just mentioned that have gone actually through the process. But if also you think it could be a valuable tool as you're doing diligence on your entrepreneurs that you're thinking of investing in, that's another application for it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. That's a great question, Moses. So thanks very much for that. We've got one from Jay Patel, actually, from American Family Insurance, the Institute for Social Impact. So I think it's actually John McIntyre, actually. It's come up as Jay, but I think it's John, who was at the GCVI Summit a few weeks ago. He says, we're a new social impact funds, and there was a roundtable discussion with corporate social impact organizations. Around 20 were there. It would be helpful to build up this community of practice around social impact investing. So I think John's effectively saying, they're in. They met some good people at the GCVI Summit, so thanks very much for your input from there. From my point of view, John, it was great to have the views. It'd be good if other corporations are coming involved. Is there a sort of a good forum or meeting point? One of the things that we had coming out of that discussion was the idea of creating a committee or allowing some of the corporate venturers or some of the investors to kind of share some war stories, work out how they could get started. If they hadn't started, what was involved. I'm just wondering, Amanda and Shah, if you can, if there's any sort of places that people could think about getting some information and whether there are existing sort of communities in this ecosystem, particularly for corporate venturers. I know you mentioned the Impact Management Project. Is that a good place to start? What about Jim? What would you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I think if it was Jay Patel who asked the question as well, if we are aware of sort of the very wide-ranging market that's out there, with a lot of space to discuss and debate, but maybe not a lot of convergence and consolidation. So we're hoping through this partnership with Jim and GCV to make sure that at least corporates know where they can go to ask questions on what impact strategies could mean for them. But in the wider universe, we are absolutely seeing places where different types of organizations can come together and talk about impacts and what they're doing about it. So as Jim mentioned, the Global Impact Investing Network is a membership organization for those who identify as impact investors. There are many other networks as well around the world, and sometimes with a geographic focus, so depending on if you're in the US or more broadly, that are focused on those who think about it just more widely and want to improve the practice of managing what they know and report, and sort of data management around impact. A lot of those organizations are involved in the impact management project, which you mentioned, Jim. That is a public good, so anyone can feel free to go to that website, explore the content, think of it just as a resource for you as you're getting grounded in impact if you're new to the adventure. And actually soon there'll be a forum in partnership with the Harvard Business Review to make sure that any conversations that have to be had and questions to discuss can be done. So in a really open manner. So the last thing I'll say is, I mean, from my perspective, I feel like what gets lost, and even in the wider world when they think about the role of corporates in all of this, we need to shine a light on the best examples, and we need to talk about it more, and we need to be really honest about what it's achieving and what more we have to do. So it's both a question for us, I feel, Jay and everyone on the line, but also a question for everyone here. What are we going to do to offer our learnings, our best practice, because at the end of the day, if everyone is doing a little more around impact, the world will be a lot better place. So just we're open to get creative, Shar and I always, in terms of what more is needed to make this just much more common and much more exciting with Jim and the team. And if anyone on the call has ideas about what they'd like to see, please feel free to shout out now.
Wonderful. Just to follow up on that in one way, I mean, one of the things that came out from that roundtable that John mentioned at the GCVI summit a couple of weeks ago was that almost the corporations were falling into three broad buckets. There were groups that, as you mentioned, Danone or Patagonia, groups like Salesforce, which have a dedicated impact fund. They say, right, it's an impact fund, we're doing impact deals, it's very clear. We're using these sort of templates, these ideas, these frameworks for thinking about them. There was a second group which were kind of like, we're thinking about an impact fund. Tell us more. How do we get started? Exactly as John says. What is the community? Where can we, learn from best practices and perhaps avoid some mistakes? And then the sort of bit in the middle, which I found really interesting to hear from, were the groups that were effectively saying, kind of, we already do this. We already do impact investing through our CVC. We're investing in emerging markets. We're investing in areas that would be classified under the SDGs. It's poverty reduction, or it's avoiding hunger, those types of things. We just don't call it impact. We just don't see a reason why to give it that label. So I'm just interested, Shar and Amanda, from your points of view, is that impact label helpful, or does it start to sort of limit people in any way? Is there a sort of an issue that actually start to define impact too much, and therefore you miss the actual purpose, the goal, and use a little bit of the flexibility? And does it matter if they don't call themselves impact, and if they're doing the work anyway, if they're already acting as those agents of change?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I think there has historically been a different answer than the one I'm going to give you all now. I think historically there have been silos built in a way, and sort of tags that have helped create an identity, I guess, around what it means to invest in impact. And as I said earlier, also spotlighting stories of where this is happening. So it's been progress, absolutely. But I think where we are now is a recognition that every business and every investor is having effects on people on the planet. And so it's now up to all of us to just manage those, to do less bad and more good, as I said earlier. And in that sense, it becomes not narrow at all and very present in everything we do. And where we can spotlight examples of where we are avoiding harm within our supply chains, to our employees, to our local community and the environment, we should celebrate that in the same way that we should celebrate the businesses that are starting up to solve the malnutrition crisis in Tanzania, right? And some are going to be very focused and very targeted in what they aim to achieve. And that is excellent. We need that expertise and we need that energy going into some of the toughest problems in the toughest areas of the world. And we also need to recognize that others, and especially investors, might choose a much wider thesis and say, if we can make sure that any company that we invest in is thinking responsibly about all of its stakeholders, and maybe is willing to certify as a B Corp to be held accountable to that in a way, then we feel much more confident that our investments and our portfolio will perform well in the long term, and that we can encourage them to do more as we engage throughout the investment cycle. So there's, it's not an answer to your question, Jim, but hopefully a shift in the direction of it not, first of all, being more narrow, and it actually, in a lot of senses, becoming a lot wider with an invitation to all to do less bad and more good. And absolutely not a necessity to sort of tag as impact or say you are an impact business or impact venture fund, but rather be considering the impact of what you're doing in your decision making, and making sure that you're sharing lessons learned about that as you go, wherever possible. Shar, do you have anything to add?
Not really. Actually, I think that was beautifully done. I guess I'm just so you can hear the conversation that's happening sort of on an ongoing basis between Amanda and I. I would agree. I think that last point you made is a really important one, which is making sure there is some form of connective tissue that allows people to be able to share with one another what's working and what's not working. So I think as long as there is that sort of channel for people to understand what's happening in one place and how it might be adopted or adapted or evolved to fit another investment thesis that might be similar but not exactly the same, and maybe not using the same language, I think that the sort of the emphasis should be on how do we make sure we are connected to one another, can learn from one another, kind of regardless of what we kind of call it, if you would agree, Amanda.
Definitely.
And it's great. And one of the things that came out from there, obviously from the slides and what you've just mentioned, is this idea that, potentially you could get better performance. And so I'm wondering whether there's anything, given how early it feels that we are within the impact movement, of any sort of sense of whether CVCs that do take up this impact approach actually have either a better, IRR, a better financial return, and or there's even a better strategic return. Their parents are more likely to survive. There seem to be some, sort of indicative evidence that you're likely to outperform if you invested in sustainable public companies. But I'm just wondering, from a CVC point of view, are we too early in that process to get any data, or what's the sort of sense from the people who have been doing this, whether it's Centrica or all the way through to Patagonia and Salesforce and the others? Is there any anything that kind of indicates that this is a positive?
Yeah, well, that's where I think we are still in sort of the emergent stages of a lot of this. So I wouldn't want to draw any generalizations based on what exits have occurred or what sort of some returns are. And in some ways, I feel like that's a really interesting question for global corporate venturing to talk through in terms of what you've been seeing from your review of deals being done and sort of what these exit channels are going to look like. I would say that in the impact investing space, there's been a lot of work done to try and understand what these returns look like and using sort of the IRR language. I mean, one that we showcased in a piece of work that we did 3 years ago when we initially did an infographic within the series Beyond the Binary in partnership with Global Corporate Venturing as well as IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank. We looked at an exit that happened from Bridges Ventures, which again wasn't a corporate exit, but it was Babington Group, and I think if I'm not mistaken, there was a 33% IRR to that exit. But in addition to that IRR, I think equally important is to think through the number of people who used the services of this business that was able to scale with the investment from this fund, and how many of them found jobs. Essentially, as a training business. So I think in addition to that IRR percentage, I think we must always hold the discipline to not just look at what the financial return is, but really look at what are the outcomes and what are the impacts that are happening alongside these deals. But that's just one example of an impact deal that had an IRR that we came across and was obviously quite positive.
And I can just add, Jim, from the investor perspective, where I've sat for a number of years now, most investors are not thinking about this stuff because they expect to lose money on it. There are absolutely development institutions and foundations and family offices that are looking to invest and are okay to take a disproportionately low financial return. But everyone else is looking at this as an opportunity and as a place to invest because of the long-term financial performance. They each will make their own assessment of that, Jim, and I do think if we had more academic research showing correlation or causation between company performance on impact and sustainability and return expectations, we'll be in a better place in the next few years. But for now, the assessments that are being made from the investor level are absolutely with the hope that this will see better financial returns both in the short and the long run. So again, if anyone has data from their investing perspective on this, it would be great to share more examples of where we've seen this work or not.
Sounds like it's you've thrown a challenge over to us, Kaloyan. We might have to look at this in a bit more detail.
Indeed. I have a question to Shar and Amanda, if you allow me. So with certain apprehensions in the air that there might be a new economic downturn lurking ahead of us, given that it's been 10 years since the Great Recession and since 2012, I guess, with the sovereign debt crisis in Europe and all that. So, what do you think would be the impact of a potential economic downturn on impact investing, and on the willingness of various types of investors, whether it's corporates, family offices, governments, and so on, to invest in such times and under such economic circumstances where perhaps impact investing is most needed for certain groups that may be particularly vulnerable?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, and I can't pretend to have a crystal ball in front of me to try and predict what could happen and what are the different factors when it comes to economic scenarios looking forward. I personally go back to thinking in reflecting on that question is like, what are the biggest problems that we are facing? And I would challenge anyone to defend that the challenge of climate that we're experiencing and are going to increasingly experience is not a real and pressing challenge that we must collectively address. I also believe that the massive levels of inequality that are on our planet at the moment are unsustainable and inhumane, like for the level of technology and development and progress we have made it. So I guess, in answering that question, if there is another big hit, or when another big hit happens, I guess what I hope we collectively are able to do is keep our eye on the prize of what is the bigger purpose of our economic systems in their own right, and ultimately they should be engines of progress. I think what I would suggest is that the engines of progress of the past, which have been simply focused on a financial return, are not the engines that are relevant for the progress we want to see going in the future. So I would say we should be embedding this, as Amanda has shared, so deeply into our strategic thinking of everything we do, from our perspective as investors, as strategists, as consumers ourselves, as citizens, as voters. That I hope that will be strong enough and deliberate and intentional enough in the face of the big challenges that are facing us, that are, in my very humble opinion, connected to the economics, but actually even more meta than the economic conditions. And that what we need to do is really, again, focus on how we are going to approach these big problems that are facing our world and keep them front and center in everything that we do. But again, I'm not sure if that's helpful in terms of what's going to happen to impact investing if there's another recession. But maybe I'll turn it over to Amanda.
We don't know, but it's a great question, Kaloyan, and I think it's on us to reward investors and enterprises that are that are creating opportunities and recognizing who's going to get hit the hardest, and trying to reach them now and into the future. So I think where we're seeing those who are very underserved being reached, both people and the planet, we really need to reward them and hopefully identify them and get more capital to them. So that's the hope as we move forward, obviously within the context and scope of all of the corporate venturing activity that is out there, and all of the different policy and development objectives that are underway around the world.
All right.
Perfect. Well,
Thank you.
About at the hour, so I wanted to say thank you very much. I mean, just a quick mention, you had a couple of mentions of people getting in contact. What's a good email address or contact point for you both, Amanda and Shah? You know, don't know if you've got a Heliotropy, something that you can point people towards.
Yeah, you can find us on our website, which is heliotropy.com, which is sort of the business that Amanda and I work from for our corporate venturing work. So it's Amanda at heliotropy.com and Charmian at heliotropy.com. And if anyone's interested in what heliotropy means, you can check it out on our website. But there's a nice little story with why we are using that as the sort of frame for the work that we want to do as it relates to corporates and venturing and a whole lot of other ways to sort of look at ways we can create a positive, brighter future. But Jim, if you may, if you let me, this is the slide that I like to use all the time with my students, because I'm sort of somewhat haunted and inspired by this line, which comes actually from some, I think it's originally ancient wisdom from Judaism. It was Hillel the Elder who said, you know, if not us, then who? And if not now, then when? And I, again, just would encourage all of you to think about the time that we're living in right now, and if we're not going to do something about it now, then when do we ever expect to do something about it? And if it's not us who have access, you know, privilege, who do we expect to make the change that we want to see in the world? So those are just some words that I wanted to close out with as well, Jim. Thank you.
Brilliant, really humbling, very inspiring. Thank you very much. And for those who want to get in touch with the corporate venturing sort of committee that's been formed after the sort of GCVI summit, please do reach out to us at Global Corporate Venturing, and we're happy to connect you to others within the community. Cheryl, just one quick thought for the symposium coming up. Do you want to mention anything about USAID and sort of project that might be coming there?
Yeah, well, just in the last couple of seconds, I would just sort of say we are constantly working with a range of organizations who are interested in this conversation around corporate venturing and impact, and a research partner that we have developed a project with is USAID. And if anyone is interested in what they're doing and what their interest is in corporate venturing for impact, Amanda and I would be more than happy to have a conversation about it.
Good. Well, we'll have more on this topic at the GCV symposium in May. So thank you very much, Sharon and Amanda. I'll hand it back to Kaloyan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim, Amanda, Shar. It's been a wonderful, wonderful webinar for something very, very inspiring, the work that you guys do and the message you're trying to relay here. I guess with this, we will be closing this webinar. Stay tuned for our next webinar, which will take place sometime in the middle of next month, and it will deal with recent developments in the industrial sector. So stay tuned for that, and thank you very much. All have a great day or night wherever you are in the world. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.